Hello, BookTube. It's a pleasant, warm, sunny Sunday here in Boston. Uh, Daytime high temperatures are predicted to be around 83 or 84 degrees Fahrenheit, if that, so low 80s. We are poised on the brink of that not being true. We are poised on the brink of our first genuinely hot week of 2023. Not a freakish day exception, but a prolonged stretch. Tomorrow will begin the difference there, and I think next week will also include Boston's first official heat wave, where the technical definition being that the daytime high is 90 degrees Fahrenheit or higher for 3 consecutive days. Almost all of the United States, almost all of Europe, almost all of Asia and Indonesia have all been experiencing those temperatures and much worse, 40 degrees hotter than that, for 10 days, 20 days, 30 days with literally no end in sight, heat domes that don't appear to want to move. The jet stream just doesn't seem to be strong enough to dislodge them or even ameliorate them. Boston's not yet slated to get anything like that, but we are expected to have a hot week next week. So today has that wonderful feeling of being poised on a precipice. Today it will still be possible to walk, when the Bean and I go out for our afternoon walk, it'll still be possible to cover a little bit of ground, provided we have trees and shade and whatnot. Whereas the rest of the week, I don't think so. The rest of the week, I think we're going to have to parcel out our walks fairly strictly. And I don't know if it's the feeling of being poised on the precipice or the fact that I just found a bookcase. I just found a bookcase on the sidewalk just the other day. I had somebody lug it up here. I had somebody clean it. It's all ready to have books put on it. And that entails moving around all the other books. So that's a lot of fun. I don't know what it is about this week, but I have been doing a freakish amount of reading, even by my standards, this week. A huge amount of reading on the iPad and a huge amount of reading of books off shelves. Just gigantic amounts of it. Part of it has been spurred by BookTube events. There's Book Trek, the ongoing Star Trek event. There's BookTube at War. There's my category romance channel that I have with Sarah at the Bookish Knitter. And of course there's Garb August right around the corner. There's been a lot of that, but there's been a lot of other stuff too. I've been reading a ton of other stuff. Maybe it's that I'm getting, the end of the month is coming up. It's getting closer and closer, and that always gives me a little bit of a spur to do more reading. But even so, it could also be just partly that I'm trying to avoid doing a lot of writing. I have a huge amount of writing that I need to do. I do a chunk of it every day, but I should be doing more, and I know that. August is right around the corner, and August is when this thing is due. But I thought it might be pleasant to look at some of the books, just a miscellaneous selection of books here that I either have read or haven't read that are new or old. Nothing from the iPad, although I have a lot to talk about there. I think I should probably adapt. Sarah at the Bookish Knitter did a video about what's on her Kindle, that sort of thing. I think I should regularly do that. Regularly look at some of the ebooks that I'm reading in the course of a week. I don't ever do that, and I think that might be a lot of fun. But I've got print books here I thought we'd go through. The first one is out already. This will be out in your bookstores. It's a skinny little thing. This is the novel Who Needs It? By Joseph Epstein, the critic and poobah Joseph Epstein. So what have we got here? In this brief but highly engaging book, Joseph Epstein argues for the primacy of fiction and specifically the novel among all intellectual endeavors that seek to describe the behavior of human beings. Reading superior fiction, he holds, arouses the mind in a way that nothing else quite does. I wonder if that also includes reading inferior fiction, like we're going to do during Garb August. He shows us how the novel at its best operates above the level of ideas in favor of taking up the truths of the heart. I might point out here, your heart is a muscle inside your chest. It does not think. It cannot think. It is not equipped in any way to do that. So the level of ideas and the truths of the heart are the same thing. They all take place in your brain. No other form probes so deeply into that eternal mystery of mysteries, human nature. A, I think pretty much any sculpture by Michelangelo probes just as deeply into human nature as does any book ever written. And B, show me something mysterious about human nature. Show me even one thing that is. Along the way, Epstein recounts how we read fiction differently than much else we read, sets out how memory works differently in the reading of fiction than in other works, and notes that certain novels are best read at certain ages, meaning he read them then. He suggests that novels, like movies, might do well to carry ratings, with some novels best read no later than one's 20s, and others no earlier than the age of 40. Again, this means that he has done it. I love this author. I have over the bookcase of books about books. I have pretty much everything he's ever written. And this is not what the back of the cover describes here, arguing for the primacy of fiction, specifically a novel, among all intellectual endeavors. That's not what this is. As we've gone over on this channel many times before, this is just deadline prose. It's just periodic prose, occasional prose, that is now collected in a book. Some writers or their publicists like to hit that highfalutin note once they do this. They don't want to say, here's my stuff, I'm collecting it, because otherwise it would just be uncollected. Instead, they have to say, these are all little tiles in a grand mosaic that I've been working on for 700 years. No, no, this isn't that. This is just, I've got an essay, they're paying me $2,000, so I'd better write it. That sort of thing. But still, it will be entertaining. Bookish Lot by Epstein is always entertaining. Then we have an older book that I happened to find at a little free library. This is a trade paperback of The Eye of the World. Robert Jordan, the first book of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series. This with the Amazon Prime production still on the cover there. Showing an Aes Sedai walking through a gateway there with the symbol of the Wheel of Time slightly embossed on the cover. You don't have any step back artwork like in the original, where, was it Michael Whelan did a famous cover for this, and then he did a full step back of a different painting for the hardcover and the mass market paperback. I don't have a trade paperback of this. I have the hardcover with that original artwork, and I have the mass market paperback with that original artwork and the step back, and I have an ebook. But I don't have a trade paperback of this. This is a nice floppy thing that has no step back, although it does have a map. There's the map of this world. And the ebooks that I have of this have this cover artwork, this cover design, which was originally done for ebooks only. I think you can get books with these on them, but you couldn't originally. And the cover of the first one, that is the cover artwork for the original release of Eye of the World. If it's Michael Whelan or Darrell K. Sweet, one of the two, that's a detail from the original cover artwork of this. But that was not the cover artwork for this set. When this set was originally issued, it was not reprinting the cover artwork from volume number 1. It had a cover of its own, and it was weird. The cover for volume number 1 was oddly nautical, which is not what you think of when you think of this book. And I don't need this, obviously, since I have 2 paperback versions and an ebook, but I grabbed it anyway. It's nice and well made. It's floppy, and I want to reread The Wheel of Time and The Great Hunt and The Dragon Reborn in preparation for season 2 of The Wheel of Time, which I don't know if it's out already. I have a screener of, I think, 5 episodes, but I don't know if the show is out on Amazon Prime yet. But it brought back memories to see this, because I watched season 1. I binged season 1 up in the old house in Vermont with Mark Richardson and his wife. And it was a lot of fun to sit there with other viewers, with the bean sleeping right next to me. That was a lot of fun to do that. I had all sorts of mixed reactions to the first season. There was some good acting. There was some good pacing. It certainly looked expensive. Unlike, for instance, The Rings of Power, which never at any moment looks expensive, even though it cost $500 million. Season 1 of Rings of Power, that looks like a high school theater production, cost $500 million. This had a look of solid money behind it, and some pretty good performances. And of course, I wholeheartedly approved of the casting of Randall Thor. 2 thumbs way up. It took me a while. I had reservations about season 1. It took me a while to realize what those reservations were. And the thing that you have to just keep in mind about season 1, in addition to the fact that it's not a religiously accurate adaptation of the book, you also have to keep in mind that it's taking place in not 1, but 2 fantasy worlds. One is the fantasy world that we get a map of. This fantasy world. That's one fantasy world that this takes place in. The other fantasy world that this takes place in is Twitter. The old Twitter, not the white supremacist Twitter, but the old pre-Elon Musk Twitter. You have to keep that in mind, or a lot of this won't make any sense at all. In this fantasy land, there are Trollocs, and there is a great power, and there is a dragon, a man who can wield this women-only power and who can be a great danger to the whole rest of the world. In this fantasy novel, the fantasy layer is that, all of those constructs that are pretty well done. I reread this when I watched the first season of this and was struck by how much tenser a book it is than I remembered. It has a very folksy beginning. That's literally the first impression that it makes, so it was hard getting rid of that. But that is the fantasy overlay of this book. But there's also a Twitter fantasy overlay of the production, of the Amazon Prime production. And you just have to keep that in mind. You're paying attention to two fantasy worlds. In one fantasy world, there are Trollocs and a mystical power and a female secret society and whatnot. And in the other fantasy world, the Twitter fantasy world, all men are stupid, ineffectual, or evil, or all three. All of them. All of them are. There are no exceptions. The Twitter fantasy world is rigorously, militantly sexist. There is one sex that cannot ever do anything good or intentional. It's just stupid. And you just have to, if you're going to watch this and enjoy what the parts of it that can be enjoyed, and a lot of the parts of it can be enjoyed, you're just going to have to make your peace with that. That's all. Because this was done by religious zealots, and that is their belief. They would rather die than betray that belief. Another fantasy element, a Twitter fantasy element in this book, is that roughly 75% of the women are lesbian. Not 8%, but 75%. So if you encounter a female character, in the first episode or the second episode, you're going to start to think, that's a little odd. What are the odds? By the time you get to episode 5 or 6, you will have been conditioned by this show, so that when a new female character is introduced, you will wonder what other female character she's going to be sexually attracted to. The thought won't even cross your mind that she'll be heterosexual. And when it happens, 25% of the time, it's decidedly odd. It's decidedly weird. That, of course, does not obtain in reality. That is a Twitter reality. In a Twitter reality, 75% of all women are lesbian, and 100% of all women are not real, because men can buy their way into that category. So you just have to make your peace with the old style blue checkmark. Now blue checkmark on Twitter means white supremacy. Now it means something just as bad, but on the other side of the political spectrum. But you just have to make your peace with that. That is the world you're getting here. And if a Twitter fantasy world in which all men, all of them, are weak or stupid or evil, and in which 75% of all women are lesbian, if that sounds familiar to you, well, yes, it's because you've seen that Twitter fantasy world in Star Trek Discovery. You've seen that Twitter fantasy world in The Rings of Power. You've seen that Twitter fantasy world before. It's the same one. The studios that have produced these things have been, as the phrase goes, institutionally captured. The zealots, the ideologues that run these things, have the same ideology. So underneath the fantasy overlay of whatever show you're watching, you're going to get another fantasy overlay that is that. If you can look past all of that, and I believe it is possible to do, if I can do it, you can do it, you will see that season 1 of Wheel of Time was pretty good. It was pretty effective. And season 2 is coming right up. So I felt that I should grab this. I don't think that it's so ugly that I wouldn't want it on my shelf. And I don't have a trade paperback of this, so I grabbed it. I will reread it. I confess I would have been a little happier if it had been a trade paperback of The Great Hunt. And I will keep my eye out for that. I don't know if, I don't keep my eye out at little free libraries, but maybe used bookstores, or maybe even a new bookstore if a reissue of The Great Hunt is really nice. In honor of season 1 of Wheel of Time, the publisher reprinted a hardcover with the original Dust Jacket artwork by Michael Whelan or Goward Clay Sweet, whichever of the two it was. And I got that. I paid for that at Barnes & Noble. If they would do the same thing for The Great Hunt, maybe they do. Well, then I would probably get that in a trade paperback or a hardcover, just to keep going. Then we have a new book here. This comes out in October, so don't have to worry about this for a while. This is by Tasha Alexander, and it's a Lady Emily mystery. This is A Cold Highland Wind. Lovely cover there. Lady Emily, husband Colin Hargreaves, and their 3 sons eagerly embark on a family vacation at Cairnfan Castle, the Scottish estate of their dear friend Jeremy, Duke of Bainbridge. But a high-spirited celebration at the beginning of their stay comes to a grisly end when the Duke's gamekeeper is found murdered on the banks of the loch. Handsome Angus Sinclair had a host of enemies. The fiancée he abandoned at Edinburgh, the young woman who had fallen hopelessly in love with him, and the rough farmer who saw him as a rival for her affections. But what is meaning, okay, that should be what is the meaning, of the curious runic stone left on Sinclair's forehead? The date is Scotland, 1676. Lady McAllister, wife of the Lord of Cairnfan Castle, suddenly finds herself widowed and thrown out of her home. Her sole companion is a Moorish slave girl who helps her secretly spirit out of her most prized possession from the castle, her strange books. So this is going to be another Tasha Alexander book that splits the time periods of the narrative. Her neighbors are wary of a woman living on her own, and when a poppet, a doll used to cast spells, and a daisy wheel are found in her isolated cottage, Lady McAllister is accused of witchcraft, a crime punishable by death. I can't remember off the top of my head if in the Florida's fascist governor Ron DeSantis, I can't remember if the witchcraft punishments, especially capital punishment, have been reconstituted. Are they on the books yet, or is that next year? I can't remember. Can you be put to death for being a witch in Florida? I don't know. I'll have to check Google. Hundreds of years later, Lady Emily searches for the link between Lady McAllister's harrowing witchcraft trial and the brutal death of Sinclair. She must follow a trail of hidden motives, an illicit affair, and a mysterious stranger to reveal the dark side of a seemingly idyllic Highland village. Okay, I'm going to guess here. I haven't read this, won't read it until October. I'm going to guess that the, the mysterious stranger and the illicit affair, I'm going to guess that means that handsome Angus Sinclair was having an affair with a man. We shall see. A man who may or may not be connected to sorcery, to witchcraft. So I love these books. If that isn't clear, I love these books. I love this series. I'm going to put it off because it's not until the fall. But I want you to know, if you also love this series, this is a new one, and it's coming out in October. And then we have this thing. I don't know if I have a date on this. No, I don't have any sheet on this at all. But this is a finished copy from Reaction Books. I think distributed by the University of Chicago. I don't know if the publicity material is going to tell me that. It's Reaction Books, but I don't think they distribute them on their own in America. I think it's a academic publisher that does this, so this may be out already, although it won't be in your bookstore. It's not a wide release thing. You would need to order it in your bookstore. This is by Malin Newitt, and this is called Navigations, the Portuguese Discoveries and the Renaissance. So what have we got here? I have to read you the dust jacket. I don't have a sheet on this, but I bet it's out already. Things like this usually are. This book re-examines the Portuguese voyages of discovery by placing them in their medieval and Renaissance settings. It shows how these voyages grew out of a crusading ethos, as well as long-distance trade with Asia and Africa and developments in map-making and ship design. The slave trade, the diaspora of Sephardic Jews, and the intercontinental spread of plants and animals gave these voyages long-term global significance. The voyages of discovery are narrated within the political context of Portuguese politics, and this book describes the role of the Portuguese ruling dynasty, including its female members, who were bartered on the international stage for money, dowries, marriage, and land influence. They did not conduct policy. I know you have to put that in your dust jacket in 2023, but anyway. The ruling dynasty, including its female members and its members of color, and its disabled members and its neurodivergent members, in the flowering of the Portuguese Renaissance and the distinctive ideology of the Renaissance state, and in the cultural changes that took place within a wider European context. So, a Renaissance book, and Portuguese discoveries, only a handful of which most readers know. Fantastic. Just fantastic. I'll have to check a date on this thing and put a little slip in it, but I think I can probably read it tonight. I think it's probably that much due. And then we have another finished copy. Oh no, another sheet that's not here. This is probably an August release. This is Bloomsbury, UK. This might be out already. This is by Ian Golden and Tom Lee Devlin, and it's called Age of the City, Why Our Future Will Be Won or Lost Together. not a long thing. Again, not very nice design. I'll just read you the jacket copy here since I don't have a sheet for it. From centers of antiquity like Athens and Rome to modern metropolises like New York and Shanghai, cities throughout history have been the engines of human progress and the epicenters of our greatest achievements. Nice to hear that. That is absolutely true. Now, for the first time, more than half of humanity lives in cities, a share that continues to rise. In the developed world, cities are growing at a rate never seen before, and I think that percentage is off a lot. The dust jacket says more than half of humanity lives in cities. I think the number is much higher than that. It's not more than half makes it sound like 52 or 53%. I think it's somewhere around 70%. It's a lot, and they're growing. They are growing. It's kind of amazing. It's interesting as a phenomenon on its own to wonder about. In this book, visionary Oxford professor Ian Golden and the economist Tom Lee Devlin show what Tom Lee Devlin sounds familiar. That name sounds familiar to me. They show why making our societies fairer, more cohesive, and more sustainable must start with our cities. Globalization and technological change will have the concentrated wealth into a small number of booming metropolises, leaving many smaller cities and towns behind and feeding populist resentment. Yet even within seemingly thriving cities like London and Los Angeles, the gap between the haves and have-nots continues to widen, and our retreat into online worlds tears away at our social fabric. A lot there I would not agree with. A lot of the wording there is weird. A lot of that is weird. Even within seemingly thriving cities like London and Los Angeles, the gap between haves and have-nots continues to widen. First of all, I don't think many people who visited Los Angeles lately would call it seemingly thriving. And second, even within makes it sound like they should be the last holdouts, when the wealth gap would be more evident there than anywhere else. But you know what they're saying. Meanwhile, pandemics and climate change pose existential threats to the urban world we have created. Yes, yes. More and more people are congregating in cities, but pandemics and climate change, especially rampant heat, which is what is meant nowadays by climate change, will make cities uninhabitable. They'll make cities unworkable before they'll make small towns or villages uninhabitable. It's a very complex subject, especially in light of, like, for instance, that recent news item that said that the infrastructure of Chicago is not built for the heat that Chicago is currently experiencing. And that who knows what that actually means. Does that mean that subways will collapse? Does that mean that there's subways that run underneath Chicago. There are also miles and miles and miles of other kinds of tunnels, conduits of all kinds. What if they collapse in the heat? What if that whole infrastructure melts? Then what happens to the buildings that are built on top of it? Anyway, bringing together insights from a wide range of disciplines, this book takes the reader on a thought-provoking journey through the cities of the past, present, and future. From Rome to Rio, Seattle to Seoul, and Lisbon to Lagos, this is a compelling exploration of how cities came to dominate our world and why they now hold our destinies in the balance. Oh my, all right. Well, I have lived in many, many cities. I've also lived far from them. And I often think in my head of the benefits and deficits of both. I mentioned that I watched Eye of the World, for instance, up in Vermont, up in the old farmhouse in Vermont, in a small house in a small town in Vermont. And I could feel right away the benefits and also the shortcomings. The shortcomings were, for instance, very familiar to me from Iowa, from the American Midwest, which is that if you don't drive, you're at the mercy of the people who do. You're not near anything. You're not near to anywhere you want to go. And I don't drive. Don't have a driver's license, never sat behind the wheel of a car in my life. So I couldn't do it in a pinch. I don't have the first idea how it works. So that is a deficiency. But then again, I also remember all the benefits, which is how quiet it is, how wonderful it is, and also the fact that when you're walking down a side street or a road, a dirt road or whatever, you know pretty much for sure that the next person, the next human you meet, is going to be smiling and perfectly up to take 15, 20 minutes and talk. I was going to my car to go somewhere, to go to Ollie's, or I was going to my chicken coop to check on them, or I was just going to walk up the road here to see a friend. I've met you. I don't know you at all. You've got a cute dog. How you doing? What's on your mind? What are you thinking about? How about that thing in the news? That tends not to happen in cities. And it tends to happen in smaller towns. And I love that. Of course I do, since I'm a gigantic introvert. I have right now the best of both worlds. I live in Greater Boston, but it's emphasis on Greater. I live in a very leafy subdivision of Boston that is close enough so that it's actually Boston, so that it's actually considered the city of Boston, but far enough away so that you've got lots of green space and the ability to let out an easy breath and have a neighborhood, and it has a main street of its own with shops and economies of its own. That's nice. That won't always stay true, because the whole point of this book is that cities are growing enormously. Downtown Boston, the main megalopolis of Boston, is steadily growing. It's steadily expanding in all directions except outward to the ocean. It's steadily expanding north and west and south. And that will eventually subsume this area. I know that. I know that perfectly well. It won't last, on city timescales, it won't last an eye blink. And I'm not sure that I'll want that. I have lived right in the middle of cities before, many, many times. And it has a kind of grubby but undeniable energy. If you've ever lived in Manhattan, it's corrosive and addictive, but it's also enlivening. It's a weird thing. It must be what having a drug addiction feels like. I've had experiences with that, and with a couple of other big cities. Very interesting thing. I'll have to find the date on this thing and find out when it comes out, but I will read it, I think, tonight probably. And then the final book that we'll look at here, this video is all over the map, but I figure a lot of you also make videos that are all over the map, that don't really deal with anything, or that deal with everything under the sun. Like, I just watched Charlie Heathcote's latest wool gathering video, and he talks about a whole bunch of things, including his disastrous entry into his 30s. And at one point in that video, he holds up that he just recently read The Eye of the World, a trade paperback, The Eye of the World. And the UK trade paperback that he holds up is even more boring than this. I mean, it's in its design. It's an unbelievably boring cover that he holds up. I wouldn't take it for free if I saw it. And I'm a big fan of UK trade paperbacks. So that video wandered all over the map. Lots of you make videos that wander all over the map. So, but we'll finish up with one other book that just happened to be on the pile here that deserves a little bit of conversation. This is also a little bit booktube driven. We have Book Trek right now, which extends all summer. We have BookTube at War, which is the month of July. We're coming up on Garb August, the month of August, where we read garbage for the month of August. There are a bunch of other BookTube events coming up in August as well. And then in September, I don't know how much this is sunk into the groundwater, but Michael K. Vaughan has come up with yet another BookTube event for September, reading Conan. Reading the Conan stories of Robert E. Howard. I think Mike probably might have thought of this as just an event that he would do himself, but you don't get to do that. Not when I'm around to weaponize things. No, you don't. No. So we have a Sumerian September coming up for the month of September, where you read Conan stories. And even though the event has never been announced, there have never been any parameters or rules associated with it of any kind. I'm not even sure, like I said, that it is an event outside of Michael's own channel. Even though all of that is true, there's still strictures involved. There's still rules. And the rule is that you take the month of September to read or reread all of Robert E. Howard's Conan stories, which, as I mentioned, is 30 pages a day. You could do it in 1 month. And at the end of that month, if you did that, at the end of that month, you would have all of the original stuff that Robert E. Howard wrote for Conan done. You'd have it all under your belt. You would have read it all. That is the original sketchy opening stricture of Sumerian September. That was no sooner even vaguely hinted at than I started improvising on my own. I know what I want to do for Sumerian September. I want to do the Savage Sword of September. I am going to read every issue of Marvel Comics' old run on the Savage Sword of Conan. 50 years ago, they got the franchise for Robert E. Howard characters, and they did a Conan the Barbarian comic book, full-color Conan the Barbarian monthly comic book. And then Stan Lee also had the idea to do a more mature, newsstand, oversized, black and white Conan magazine called The Savage Sword of Conan. And it ran for a long time. I loved a lot of it. I couldn't get enough of Conan, of Marvel's Conan. Even when it was bad, I kept hoping the next issue would be better. And I have decided that for the Savage Sword of September, I will read all of the Savage Sword of Conan from that original run. That's 200 and something issues. I don't know what form my videos will take, but when I decided that I would do that, I immediately started thinking, well, okay, what do I have? In terms of Conan, what do I have? Not just the comic books, but everything. I believe that I have every pastiche novel. Except, ironically, maybe the very latest one, the S.M. Sterling one. I might not have a copy of that. But all the older Conan pastiche novels, I believe I have all of them. I have all the issues of Conan the Barbarian, the original Marvel run. I have all the issues that Marvel did when they got the franchise back 50 years later. They did Conan the Barbarian and the Savage Sword of Conan. I have all of those. I have all of the Robert E. Howard Conan stories as they were changed and expanded and adapted by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. I have that whole run of paperbacks that everybody had once upon a time. I also have the Ballantine 3-volume new versions of the Conan stories with original illustrations, black and white spot illustrations all throughout, that set the stories in the order that Robert E. Howard wrote them. And I also have one example of, I'm glad I only have the one. I sprang for it. I got this. Oh, this. I got a Michael K. Vaughan style Marvel omnibus of the Savage Sword of Conan. This is volume number 1 of their. They did like 10 volumes of these. They did a big, heavy hardcover omnibus edition of the whole run of the Savage Sword of Conan. Here are the issues that are in here, that are in this one. And I had a lot of these issues and loved a lot of them, especially this one. But I sprang for this thing. It has a new cover. There is a Conan who can be a thief, a reaver, and a slayer with me anytime he wants. But the genius of this cover is that you're so caught up in the somber heroics of Conan that it takes you a minute to recognize the Stegosaurus that's dead in the background. Very good Conan cover. And these things are beautiful. They are beautifully made. Get this cover, blood spattered shield on the back, and you get everything. Just everything. Look at that table of contents. Everything in the world is in here and reprinted. And I got this volume, and I had it up on the shelf, and I have a few other big omnibus hardcovers like this. So I thought, well, if I've already decided that I'm going to wholeheartedly embrace Sumerian September, and that my take on it is going to be the Savage Sword of September, so I'm going to read the Savage Sword over again, I should finally pull this down off the shelf. And, oh my God, these things are unbelievably inhospitable. They're unbelievably heavy. They're incredibly inhospitable to use or move. I've lost track of how many times I've grabbed this thing, and the sheer weight of it causes the dust jacket to fly right off it. So I'm holding the dust jacket while the book has careened to the floor and maybe crushed a schnauzer or two. And holding it like this to read it in bed, well, I might be grateful for the double-page spread, but my spleen's not grateful. My internal organs are not grateful. They only barely recovered from having an 85-pound basset hound on top of them every night. And this is digging into you. You can't put it anywhere. You can't carry it anywhere. I couldn't put it in a shoulder bag and bring it somewhere. It doesn't fit comfortably on a nightstand. I had to stand it on the floor next to the bed. It doesn't go easily anywhere on the bed. It bounces the covering. It's so heavy. I can't imagine having 10 of these on the shelf. I just can't imagine it. I have had trouble using this, is I guess my point for this weird random book video. I've had trouble using this volume. It's exhausting. It's beautifully done. Absolutely beautifully done all throughout. And you get all of the, let me show you, all of the ancillary stuff as well. You get all of the, the side features that Roy Thomas wrote forever. Roy Thomas wrote probably a 1,000-page book total of supporting prose for all of these things. I don't know that anyone's ever come to him and said, hey, could you make a book out of your Conan writings? Let aside John DeSama's artwork for now. Just your collected Conan writings. Could you put all those together and write a new introduction for 1,000 pages? I don't know that anyone's ever approached him with that or that Marvel would let him do it. But that book would sell. this has all of those extras, but at what price? My elbow, my wrist, my poor fingers. So I have to confess, even though this has been on my shelf, often when I am reading through it, especially when I get past the earliest issues, which had non-Conan things in there, when I get past the earliest issues, even though I don't get, here, let me show you an example of what I don't get. Because every issue in here, every issue in here has things that I don't get. This goes on for pages at a time, these text considerations of various aspects of Conan, not all of them by Roy Thomas. I don't get those in ebook files. But nevertheless, I have confessed, lugging this thing around, I have often just opted for ebook files, this is nothing. This is nothing at all. It's easy to carry around. So there you go. Those are some of the just random traipse through the books on this Sunday. Just to let you know what's been on my mind, what the weather's like, what I've been doing, some of the things I've been reading. Oh my God, what a reading week this has been. Oh my God. And of course, I'm curious to know about you. A lot of booktubers do weekend reading reports anyway. I'm happy to encourage you to do one of your own. I'm looking forward to another very robust reading week. I think that this coming week is going to be one that's going to be best spent reading indoors by a nice electric fan rather than doing anything. But we shall see. We shall see. Well, those are some of the books and some of my kvetches and complaints about them. Just a random book video. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.